Following a private screening of Forever Young, director David Donnelly sits down with Dr. Eric Verdin, CEO of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging.
When we started this journey, the Buck coming to the Buck was one of the first things that we actually did was go there and interview you as well as so many of your amazing staff. My question is, what has changed in the field since that first interview we did with you several years ago? Because it seems like now everyone kind of knows about longevity, and it's like the hottest topic right now. I don't think that was necessarily the case when we first sat down.
Totally true. I've been doing this type of work for now more than almost 30 years. And when my lab and other labs were making these initial discoveries, we thought this is going to be changing everything. Everybody's going to be so excited about these discoveries and their implication for human health. And lo and behold, 30 years later, here we are. It's finally permeating. I think what we're seeing is sort of a lag phase between sort of basic science discoveries and their translation into humans. And the reason why I think there's so much excitement right now is I think the message is slowly getting through to people that our understanding of the science of aging is changing, and this is going to have some massive implications in terms of human health in the future. Maybe not in the immediate future, but certainly in the distant future. So what has happened essentially for 25 years is we've been able to deploy all of the tools of molecular biology, the modern biology that really has allowed us to make so many progress in medicine, that is now being deployed against aging as an indication. And so the reason for the excitement is that people are excited. Everyone wants to live longer, but not necessarily under any conditions. So, for many of us, we're seeing our parents or our siblings aging and suffering from a whole series of chronic disease of aging. And for the first time, I think we've discovered a sort of a concerted way to address all of these problems and really change the course of human health.
Okay, here's a good question. It's very specific. Recently, there's been a lot of back and forth between Eric Topol and Peter Attia about the focus on VO2 max. What is your opinion on the importance of VO2 max as far as a critical measure of aging?
I've watched that whole discussion. So for the audience member who are not really familiar with VO2 max is a way to measure your maximum oxygen consumption. And this is done typically by going on a bike, a stationary bike, or on a treadmill. You're equipped with a mask that analyzes the oxygen that you are inhaling and the CO2 that you're producing. And so we all have a maximum ability to use oxygen, which is dependent on a whole series of factors. One is your muscle mass, your weight, but also your cardiovascular system. How able are you to, stands to reason that the more trained you are, the more muscular you are, the more you are able to, extract oxygen from the air you breathe and use it for muscle force. So in some way, the VO2 max is a test that measures your capacity to extract oxygen and to generate force. Now, it turns out that if you use that as a marker, it is highly predictive of your life expectancy. Okay, and probably the reason for this is we know exercise and physical activity. How fit you are is going to be a predictor of how long you're going to be living. Now, what has not been demonstrated is that whether this is a causal or that is really, working, for example, to only increase your VO2 max is going to be sufficient to make you live longer. And the same, I'll give you another example. Another marker that we know is highly predictive for life expectancy is your grip strength. And so, which is again, another sort of indirect evidence of how fit you are. The more you work out, the more heavy objects you carry and so on, the more fit you are and the longer you're going to live. What a number of people in the field have taken to do is to actually start working out, with these grip strength maker. And the question is that makes me laugh because it's a bit of a caricature, as if that's going to make you live longer. I don't think so. In the case of grip strength, it clearly is an indirect indicator of how fit you are, but having strong forearm, I don't think is going to make you live longer. I would say the situation is a little different for VO2 max because I think it integrates your lung capacity, your muscular and your lung, integrates your heart pumping strength, integrates your whole vascular system and your muscle. So it's probably a surrogate marker of how long you're going to live. So it's a little bit of a technical question, but I would say they're both right in a way that for many of these markers that we use, a causal association has been demonstrated, but a direct effect has not been demonstrated. I'll give you another example, which I think is kind of cute. People who floss their teeth live on average 4 years longer than people who do not floss. Now, we all know that having good oral hygiene is important for your longevity, but I don't think that flossing your teeth, if you've never done it before, is going to all of a sudden make you live 4 years longer. What it indicates is that you most likely are someone who is more attuned to your health and more careful about what you're doing for maintaining your good health. And this is why the association exists.
Okay, lots of questions rolling in here. There's so much hype and misinformation on supplements, diet, intermittent fasting, exercising out there on social media. What are the best resources to know the validity and reliability of this information? One of the reasons why we made the film, how do people, sift through all of the noise?
That's a tough one. I would argue that right now we live in an environment where we are saturated with information, and so um, and think about Instagram, or what I call now Instagram medicine, where a whole lot of people who have no training, frankly, no no particular expertise, have declared themselves sort of influencers and go and advise people on their health. Um, so I don't dispute their right to do this. The question is, um, for the public, it's very hard to sift through all of these information. My argument would be to try to find some trusted sources and to examine what is the relevant experience of these people, what is their training, are they speaking from a bank of knowledge, or are they simply aggregators of information. That being said, some people actually have done who were not sort of medical doctors and so on, are doing a remarkable job at providing good curated information, and I think that's really we at the Buck Institute, we do a lot of work in the more and more in the field of education. We have a website, so if your audience are interested in it, we provide all kinds of information, and we will be providing more and more. And we think that since education is one of our mission, we hope that we will become a trusted source of information for people in the future.
Also, we've got a Substack for our Forever Young film, which really is just a wealth of knowledge from all the people that you see in the film, from a lot of the stuff that didn't make it into the film itself. So those same experts that are in the film, you can learn a lot from them, from us pulling those resources. You can learn more about that at foreveryoung.film. And of course, the Buck, you guys have a great newsletter, and you're always breaking news and the latest research. I look forward to it anytime I get an email from you guys in general.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Dave, sorry, go ahead.
Let me add one point to this, which I think is important. Um, One of the things that I have become more and more aware as I'm getting more into this and seeing, what happened to some of these influencers, which can in some way discredit the whole field, is that as scientists, I think we should be a lot more present in the public debate. Quite frankly, I mean, it was not well considered for us to be in social media such as LinkedIn and Instagram and Substack. And I've decided, over this past year to change this.
But are you on TikTok? That's the real question.
No, not yet. I haven't been able to cross that barrier yet.
Yeah, I mean, no, I get it. I mean, people are. I think if somebody's really good at science at the same time, it's also it's hard to mention. Well, why should they have to be good at public speaking or doing it? But I mean, that's the world that we live in now. So
I
as we
agree.
talk about in the film, there's a knowledge gap and it's costing people years of their life simply because the information is not getting out there and people aren't connecting with it. So that is now part of the mission is to get it out there. So bravo to you for taking that step.
Thank you. I totally agree with this. And frankly, um, I have actually very much enjoyed this new part of my job because really, you interact with people, and it really forces us also as scientists to refine our message in ways that people can understand, and with direct implications that to their own lives. And I'm one thing that is quite striking is the gap that still exists between what most people go by and what the current status of knowledge is today. So we definitely think that there's a gap to be filled there, and it would be better to fill it with validated information than with you know.
No, I get it. And now movie star gets added to your credit as a result of that. So there we go. Here's another one. What are we likely to see available to us in the next 2 or 3 years? For example, doctors cannot, at least in clinical trials, inject medicine against certain cancers into white blood cells and re-inject back in the body to produce a cure. This is just in general a great question. What do you see the future in the next couple of years? Paint us a picture.
So there are two aspects really. When you think about longevity, everybody thinks it's about living longer, but in fact, it is more about living better. As was outlined in the film, there are two directions in which the longevity field works on. One is the idea of health span. These are the healthy years of life, and the other part is the longevity, living longer. Obviously, we all want to live longer, but not at any cost. We want to live better longer. That's the tagline from the book. So living more healthy is doable today, and that's just mostly based on lifestyle factors: nutrition, physical activity, um, sleep, stress mitigation, human connections. These are all the variables that we can all work on. Now, someone will tell you, well, this is the stuff that my grandmother used to tell me, and there's really nothing new about what you're providing or helping us. That's not entirely true because uh, just think about nutrition. If I were to ask 100 people around this room, what are the most important way to actually to have a nutrition that's consistent with a long lifespan, people will have some ideas, but there's still many factors that are not known. So what the field of longevity is focused on is understanding these modalities in much more precise way. We have biomarkers of aging now that we can deploy. We can actually test different diets. We can predict which ones are going to be more helpful. So there's a lot happening in the longevity field that sounds like what your grandmother used to tell you, but it's a lot more than this. It's a lot more precise. And so this is one of the message. The same thing for physical activity. People tell me, well, I don't like to do sports. What am I supposed to do? And I tell them, when we think about longevity and physical activity, there's zone 2 training, which is aerobic, cardiovascular, sort of running, walking, and so on. But then there's high intensity interval training, VO2 max training. There is mobility, there's flexibility, there's stability, there is strength training. We're using actually heavy weight. And in what proportion are you supposed to use all of those? These are areas that we are all working on. Same thing for sleep. What is optimal sleep? How many hours do you need to sleep? So all of these is one big aspect of the longevity field. The other aspect is more, I would say, cutting edge. It's looking to, assuming that everyone is living healthier most of their lives. So, by the way, the lifestyle factors that I just talked about, people say, well, that's not really that important, but there's 20 years of extra healthy life in there for most of us. The difference between someone who does everything wrong and someone who does everything right is probably living between 70 years old or 65 to 70 years old and living 85 to 95 years old. And I've made the point that most of us could expect to live to around 95 years old if we were to deploy all of these lifestyle factors. Now, the question is, what can we do beyond this? This is the whole idea of sort of life extension. And there's a lot of work going on in this direction as well. In animal models, we can do this. We have drugs that target aging pathways, and they can increase significantly lifespan by 20, 30, 40% sometimes. And the good news is that many of these interventions are in trials in humans. So my prediction is that within the next 5 years, we'll have at least one or two of these interventions become public, become available. By the way, many of these drugs that might already be there as
Right.
drugs that we're currently using. What we don't, and a good example that everyone is talking about these days is the GLP-1 agonist. Think about Ozempic and all these weight loss medicine. They seem to be exhibiting activities that are consistent with life extension and healthy life extension. And so the question is, a lot of people have jumped in and actually are taking them, but we don't know for sure that they will actually increase life expectancy. We think the indications are there, but obviously we need to do the clinical trials, and these are ongoing. So within the next 5 years, we will have more indication of what drugs actually that we have available today, and what future drugs can we develop that will further this process.
Yeah, there are human trials that are going on in 2026. There's a lot of exciting things that I'm looking forward to see how they pan out. Now, when you talk about these developments, are you saying that these would be general anti-aging drugs for the first time?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty remarkable that we would be living through something like that.
Yeah,
Really.
and yeah, and think about the evidence that's coming out with the GLP-1 agonist is that they seem to be cardioprotect. So they induce weight loss. We've known for a long time that they prevent the occurrence of type 2 diabetes. They increase insulin sensitivity, but now we have clear evidence they seem to be cardioprotective. They protect against cardiovascular disease. They seem to be protective for the kidney. Um, Clinical trials that have looked at their neuroprotective effect have failed so far, but there's some evidence also that those trials might not have been the right trials. So there's a lot of excitement. They clearly decrease inflammation. So there's a lot of interest in terms of what's going to happen. But these are, by the way, these are not the only ones. We have right now about 7 or 8 drugs that are approved in humans that have demonstrated specific anti-aging effect in animal models. And so, think about metformin, think about a family of other anti-diabetic drugs called the SGLT2 inhibitors. Jardiance is a good example. So I think we're very busy with all of those. And my prediction is that if you stay informed about what's happening, we will hear about some of these drugs having a global anti-aging protective effect.
Yeah, that is a lot to consider, but very optimistic for the future. Let me go through some more questions here. Have you guys done any research on why Japanese have longer life expectancy compared to other nationalities?
Uh, Not us in particular at the BAC, but there are a number of factors that have been identified that are more pervasive in Japanese culture. Typically, I mean, the population has much less obesity than we do. As you know, their diet seems to be much more conducive to it's a low-fat diet with a lot of fish products. One aspect that I always think is quite remarkable is the human connections. It's a much more cohesive and organized society in a way. Multi-family generations living together. We know that one of the things that really hurts our elders is the isolation. We saw this acutely exposed during the pandemic, where because of staying in place and so on, older people were not able to see their children. Was a wave of depression across the country because of this. So a big increase in depression and isolation, and I think this really is associated with a short lifespan. One of the biggest predictor of life expectancy in humans is the number of loving connections that you have, and how are you able to live those. And it's clear that if you're living with your children, you're probably feeling more supported and more appreciated than if you're living by yourself, basically. Especially when you're relying on help to help you go through your day.
Let's see, this is for Peter. How can I get this film for my clients? Peter, email me at team@foreveryoung.film, and we will get you set up as an affiliate. What wearables would you recommend? That's a good one. There's a lot of options out there. First of all, do they make a difference? Second of all, do you have a brand that you use or,
Yes, I'm uh, I use the Whoop. And full disclosure, I sit on the board of Whoop, so I don't speak completely objectively. But I tell people the reason I chose the Whoop is that I felt that this was the one that was the most closely aligned with our work. I mean, close a competitor is Aura, which is a ring. Both of them offer somewhat the same services. The idea is that they are becoming, and they will become, I'm convinced, important tools in the medical world. Medical world has not recognized them yet, and you will hear a lot of complaints that they are not precise, that they don't do everything as precisely as it should do. And I think they're all missing the point, which is they become tool for sort of introspection in terms of what your lifestyle really looks like. And for many people, for example, the discovery that they're not sleeping well, I'm trying to discover the factors that can optimize this, the amount of exercise that you do, the amount of movement. I believe, frankly, that everyone should wear one and learn how to use them. The beauty of with Whoop and Aura is that you can use them at different levels. You can use them at a rather superficial level if you just want to become sort of more enlightened in terms of what you do. But if you weren't interested in digging very deep, they offer incredible resources, and some of them now are offering a blood testing as well. So I think it is part of a movement that I think is really exciting for me as a physician, which is what I call the empowered patient. This is the idea that uh, we are moving away from a system of what I would call paternalistic medicine, where you essentially put your hands in the your life in the hands of the doctor and you hope for the best. Um, this empowered patient is a patient that becomes more and more aware and educated about what leads to health and actually starts to monitor himself or herself. And, talking to physician colleagues, they tell me there's a whole new breed of these empowered patients that show up in the clinic and they come up with their data from Whoop and from Aura and they want questions. And I think this is the part of the whole movement of biohacking, which sometimes has been decried by some of my colleagues, but I do not agree with this. The whole biohacking movement has of course, it has its own excesses, where people will inject with indiscriminately with some peptides or some other unproven supplements. But the philosophy of biohacking is the idea that you're taking your own health uh, partly into your hand, and hopefully, if you do this in partnership with a doctor, who is also enlightened, I think I can only see one result coming out of this is an improved health.
how's the blood pressure on the Whoop?
What blood pressure is really interesting. It's one of the holy grails for wearables because we know that your blood pressure is a really high predictor of your life expectancy and your health. We also know that there's something called the white coat syndrome. Is that if you go to your doctor, you are not in your element. You might be nervous, and the doctor will measure your blood pressure. All of a sudden, it's a little high, but when you live every day at home, it's actually normal. So hence the interest in having a blood pressure measurement that would be continuous, that would be happening at home, maybe when you sleep, when you exercise, and so on. A little bit similar to this is the CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, where you can monitor your glucose level. This has really taken the field of longevity and medicine by storm because people now can measure their blood sugar continuously. And we have found all kinds of interesting things. People becoming hypoglycemic, low blood sugar at night that we didn't know. Or people, being hyperglycemic after eating some food so they would come in the morning at the doctor fasting and their blood sugar would be completely normal, but every day during their lives, depending on their diet, their blood sugar would be fluctuating wildly. So there is incredible value in obtaining data from patients in their normal, natural setting when they're not stressed, when they go about their normal life.
Even if it's not super accurate, right? I mean, it's just the
Yes,
idea.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
so
And
that's
so,
what I
hence,
was wondering.
Yeah, and hence the interest in measuring blood pressure continuously with these wearables. It's important to know it does not measure your blood pressure directly. It measures a wave. The wave of your pulse can sort of predict what your blood pressure is. Um, I have been told that it's somewhat precise, but you need to recalibrate it frequently. And some other people think that the precision degrades if patients' arteries become more stiff and so on. So it's not been approved by the FDA, so it's not something of medical grade. Um, that being said, I think I would encourage your your listeners to actually get a blood pressure cuff at home. You can buy one for $30 on Amazon, and then use it at home, not in a hospital setting. Those are much more precise, and they will still give you a feeling if you measure it every morning, if you measure it at night, from time to time. They're automatic. They're really easy to use. That would be the second best.
Yeah, that's what Dr. J swears by. So every morning he's got that out on his and takes it out and gets those measurements in. Wow, thanks guys for all the love coming in here for the film. Yeah, we did put a lot of heart into this. It did take quite a bit of time, but we're very pleased with the results and the feedback that we're getting. Let's see some more questions here. Regarding stem cells, there are many health professionals using for skin regeneration. Are there safe parameters to be aware of, or what are your general thoughts about discoveries in that field?
My argument would be to be careful, uh, because this is right at the cutting edge. As far as I'm concerned, there are no approved demonstrated stem cells for aging or against aging, certainly not for the skin. Um, and no, that doesn't mean that some people are not using them or not seeing some results, but I would argue that until these treatments are proven to be safe and efficacious, because safe is not the only thing. Obviously, they have to work. Um, the whole field of stem cell is a bit like the field of peptides. It's one that is attracting a number of, I would say, characters that are more interested in making money than actually really helping you. And my argument is always first, if it's not in the US, the first question to ask to the person is, why is it not in the US? And they'll say, well, it's in the Bahamas. And the answer typically is, well, because we cannot do this in America. And then the next question should be, well, why can't you do this in America? And then the answer will be, well, because it's not proven to be safe and efficacious. So uh, being in the field, I've heard of enough horror stories of people going abroad to be injected with stem cell of dubious origin, to know that it's not always benign. That some people have lost their lives, and some people have actually suffered from some of these unscrupulous characters. So I would argue there's a lot of work ongoing right now, trying to understand what is it about stem cells that can help us rejuvenate and stay healthy. So I don't want to be sort of dissing here the field of stem cell biology, because I think it's critical, and we know stem cell function is important for tissue regeneration and for tissue maintenance. So there's a lot of research, a lot of interest trying to understand how do we do this. The question is, I think we are not there yet in terms of safety and efficacy.
Right. Let's see here. Back to GLP-1s. At present, is there any data that shows microdosing to be beneficial for metabolism health? Second question, Eric, can you further elaborate on how the way we think affects how well we age? Two big ones there.
I love both questions. So let's start with the GLP-1. Yes, the answer is yes. There is evidence that even what people call microdosing is essentially it's somewhat of a misnomer. It should be called low dosing, because typically people imagine the case of Zepbound, which is one of the drug called tirzepatide. The starting dose in the clinic is 2.5 milligrams. And patients are typically increased from 2.5 milligrams up to 15. Well, there's a whole group of people taking 2.5 milligrams and never going above this. And so this doesn't induce the rapid weight loss, but I have seen numbers showing that even at those low doses, there are profound metabolic effects that are consistent with the fact that these drugs might be increasing health span and lifespan. So that's what we call microdosing. So essentially, it's more low dosing. And these doses typically are not associated with weight loss. So, and this is where the drugs become really interesting, because obviously if you're overweight which is a risk factor for accelerated aging, if you lose weight, you're going to be doing better. The question for the drugs was, do they still work in someone who's has a normal weight? And the answer in preliminary experiments seems to be yes. Some of the effects that we see in the clinic appear to be completely independent of weight loss. And now the second question, can you remind me, as I was speaking about this one, what was the...
About thinking, how does the way that we think impact our age?
Oh, yes. I love this because it is one recent study last year showed that optimists live 7 years longer than pessimists. And so typically when I describe this to people, they will tell me, well, I'm a pessimist and therefore, I'm doomed. My answer to this is that being optimist and pessimist is partly a consequence of your character, but is also a choice. If everything that you consume is bad news, websites that only talk about gloom and doom, violence, and also it is very likely that it is going to color your mind. And I tell people, the people you associate with, the type of media content that you view, the way you go about your life, we all have the choice to go for something that's positive. It's clear that if you spend your afternoon in beautiful nature, or versus you spend it playing a violent video game, you're going to feel differently at the end of the day. And so my argument for people is that rather than defining yourself as pessimist or optimist, surround yourself by beauty and by people who are actually supportive and loving, and go about your life in a way that shows that actually you choose to be surrounded by those attributes. And eventually, I'm convinced that these will actually change your outlook on whether you feel pessimistic or optimistic.
How can relationship and love be incorporated into the overall research on quality and longevity? Because I assume it is difficult to measure them. Great question.
I love
We
this.
we do talk a little bit about that in the film, but there is no biomarker of love yet. I don't know if somebody's working on that or not.
Well,
But
that's not completely true, and I'll tell you why. I think this is one area that I'm totally passionate about, and I actually, as a matter of fact, I've been trying to fundraise to build a new center for the psychobiology of aging at the Buck. The whole idea of this center is to actually address this very important question. We know that your loving relationship is the biggest predictor of your life expectancy, bigger than what you eat, exercise, and all of this. It's the biggest contributor. That being said, it is the least studied, okay, at least in experimental system. And the reason is we don't know how test this in mice or rats. We don't know what their love status is. We grow them in these little boxes where they are essentially lonely. So I think we're doing a terrible job at mimicking this in the laboratory setting. That being said, there have been studies, for example, in fruit flies, showing that when you isolate them, they live much shorter. And the way they isolate them, and they make them grow in these little capillary tubes. So the flies are living in little tubes, and they live shorter when they are in these tubes than when they live in a normal room. What's really interesting is they live even shorter when you actually put all the tubes together so that they can see the other flies. So even at that level of animal, there is incredible biology about what it means to be lonely. And, loneliness is something obviously very subjective. So we want to study this a lot more in the laboratory setting, not only in animal models, but also in humans. one thing that's important to realize is, even though these are what we call human emotions, they're all driven by biochemistry. There's nothing in us that happens that is not biochemistry. Your feeling of love and affection and all of this, these are biochemical reaction. And there are some indicators. A good example is oxytocin. This is a hormone that's in your brain that also circulates in your whole body. It's the hormone of human bonding. For example, when a mother breastfeeds, there's a surge of oxytocin, and that special relationship between the child and the mother is oxytocin. When you are in love and you're spending time with your loved one, there's a surge in oxytocin. There's some evidence that oxytocin increases lifespan. And so that's really the only example that we have right now of a molecular mechanism that links this feeling of being surrounded by your family and being loved to longevity. I think we need to study this a lot more because obviously it's really critical.
I
And
think
we're talking.
that's really exciting. I had no idea that you were working on that. I mean, when it comes to consciousness as we're living longer, and people are more anxious and depressed than ever before, we've got a recipe for disaster if we don't start really focusing on these other elements. So, yeah, that's really exciting stuff. Have you announced that yet? I mean, are you actively?
Not in a very sort of a public way, but I've talked to
You
the
have
other
now.
few. I have now. Hopefully, someone will be excited by this and come and help us out. There are very few people studying this, but we would love. Our vision is to build one at the back where we would be recruiting some of the best people and help us to study aging in this context.
Yeah, Dr. Tom Lewis, who's in the film, has an excellent book, General Theory of Love, and really goes into this. And he's got just a really amazing perspective on it, especially with the concept limbic resonance and the actual what happens neurologically throughout that process, and how it is something that we absolutely need for our health. So, um,
It's not only about love; it's also about relevance and meaning. Uh,
right,
for example, another really strong predictor of life expectancy is the sense of purpose. We know that, for example, when people retire, especially in men who identify much more with their work, at least historically, um, when they retire, there's a peak of mortality because a lot of these men have lose their sort of sense of relevance, a sense of purpose until they rediscover another way of being that's not related to work. So I think all of these soft variables, I think, need to be studied a lot more, and they're quite interesting.
yeah, they are, and I think essential for people living longer. If we don't deal with it, it's just going to keep compounding. So it's a problem that's not going to go away. And what's happening in the longevity revolution now, we are going to be living longer. We already are living longer. The only question is, what kind of quality of life is that going to be? So I do think that's really, really, really exciting stuff. Here's a light question. Why is the work at the Buck the most important work for humanity to be doing right now? Good question. Benjamin, thank you for that one. Go for it, Alex.
Uh, it's a great question. It's one that I ask myself: Am I doing the most important thing that I can do with my own life? I cannot speak for everybody else's life, but for me, the reason why I think this is the most important work that can be done is if you think about the way medical research is progressing right now, is we have institutes or scientists that are studying heart disease. We have people studying heart attacks, people studying Alzheimer's disease. Medicine right now is fragmented. Um, in studying all of these, what we call the chronic disease of aging. And the practice of medicine is fragmented also. When you go see your physician, he will treat uh, your heart attack as if it were an independent occurrence. There's a whole group of disease that we call the chronic disease of aging, and I will list them: heart attack, stroke, macular degeneration, sarcopenia, is a loss of muscle mass, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, many forms of cancer are age associated, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. The list goes on and on and on of all of these diseases that we see around us in our elders, and actually sometimes in people that are not so old, in their 50s and 60s. Uh, Medicine and most research and most medicine is treating all of these conditions as if they were independent occurrences. Okay, so you get a heart attack, you get treated, wonderful. Then you survive another 5 years, you get cancer, you get treated, wonderful. We know that this approach is bound to fail because if we were to eliminate cancer today, we know that life expectancy would increase by 2.8 years, which means, we talk about the cancer moonshot as if we were going to solve everything. It's only going to make us live to 2.8 years because we will still continue aging. And as you age, your risk factor for all of these other conditions will increase. So, why I think the Buck is really a unique organization and what we do is that we are focusing on the common trunk of all of these diseases, which is the aging process. Now, until 20 years ago, people thought that aging was an intractable problem, that you could not study it, that you could not interfere with it. And this has changed. This is what has changed in the last 20 years since the Buck has been in existence. Is we now know how to tune the aging process. And when you slow it down or accelerate it, when you tune it down, what happens is this, your risk factor for all of these diseases decreases together. So rather than playing whack-a-mole medicine, which is what we do today, we actually have identified a common trunk, which is the most important one in keeping us healthy as we age.
Yeah. Okay. So it is the most important thing that you could be doing for humanity right now, I guess. Thanks again for all the positive comments, guys. Yeah. Website for the film is foreveryoung.film. We do have a rental option on there. If you guys wanted to share this with your friends and family, they can go there and also watch it directly on the site. That's for a limited time before we go to streamers. Let's see. Can we get a typed list of answers to the questions that asked? Jim, we will be this exact Q&A. We will be uploading and editing and putting onto our Substack, our Forever Young Substack, as well as breaking it down into smaller clips and putting it across social. That will have a transcript. So if you sign up for our Substack, then you'll be able to access the transcript of this interview right now. What is the other device other than that Dr. Verdin mentioned? Whoop, right?
WHOOP.
Whoop. Okay. Nice sponsor drop there. I love it. Dr. Eric Verdin, the immortal jellyfish was shown in the film. Is this a species of living proof that deep in the ocean you have the perfect underwater biome for a living creature to get it what it needs to live? Good.
Well, yeah, there is a form of life that is almost immortal, the Hydra, but it's so different from what we are that I always tell people, some people have argued that we could become immortal. I resist these types of clarification because we don't have any evidence that we're going to be able to be immortal ever. And taking examples of these lower animal species is, some trees live 1,000-year-old, and I would say that doesn't mean that I would want to live as a tree. And it's the same thing for some of these very simple life creatures. That being said, we also know that some forms of life have engineered themselves through evolution to live much longer than we live. There's a shark that lives 500 years. So this is a fish, but it's living 500 years. I mean, it has solved a lot of the problems in terms of living longer. So elephants live significantly longer than us. So turtles as well. So there's a lot of work that's actually being conducted, trying to learn from these extremes of longevity, trying to see what are they doing better than we do, and can we actually engineer ourselves either through genetic engineering in the future or through drugs to actually mimic what they have discovered that makes them live longer. So these are this so-called comparative biology area is actually, there's a lot of really interesting things going on right now. And we'll be posting on my Substack about some of these unique papers. A couple of them were published last year that provided some beginning of understanding of what do the whales do, for example, to allow them to live so long and so on.
So the next time I come to the Buck, it's going to be like Noah's Ark. Is that what you're saying? That's just going to be animals and all the. That's
Yeah,
yeah. This
think about it. It's an incredible experiment that's been going on for billions of years in all of these animal species, and some of them have engineered longevity, by luck and by evolution. And so I think there's a lot to be learned by what they're doing.
It's there's so much going on at the same time. It's that's just trying to keep up, I think, is, I don't know how you do it, just keeping up with all the various, research that's happening, especially with AI that's just, putting gasoline on this kind of intellectual fire in this sphere. I
Really,
mean, it really is overwhelming in the most positive way, but at the same time,
absolutely.
it's just a lot to process on a regular
It's
basis.
like being in a candy store. I would say what I would argue is that there are a number of doctors who are developing practices that we call longevity clinics. So these are doctors that really look at aging as a risk factor. I would, I don't want to be, recommending some people here locally, especially since people are from all over the place. Again, the longevity clinics, some are great and reputable, some are less reputable. I was told recently that there's in Dubai a longevity hair place, so you can get your longevity hair cut. So that means that people are jumping on the term longevity, to do something cool. But
What is a longevity haircut? I wanna know
I
that.
have no idea. It's the one that makes you look younger, probably.
Oh, okay.
So
Why'd I do that?
I'm using that example to show you that some people have no scruples and will call themselves
Oh,
longevity.
In London, everywhere we go now, there's just longevity clinics popping up, and then they say longevity clinics, but then you look at what the services are, and it's like NAD plus shots. It's like,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
what?
Exactly.
I'm like,
Yeah, by the
really?
way, one thing that I think I would like to talk about briefly, that brings up the point of supplements. The whole world of supplement is one that's really, we talked about the drugs that could increase lifespan, so these will be in the future approved by doctors and so on. But then there's a whole unregulated world of supplements where you can take a whole series of pills. Um, Being confronted with so many questions by people, patients, and so on about what supplement should I take, I built on my Instagram and on LinkedIn a table of recommendation of trying to categorize the dozens of supplements that are currently available. Many of them are sold on Instagram or other place or on Amazon as being pro longevity, and we talked about NAD. It's one of them. So we've organized them into different categories: what everybody should take, what nobody should take, and then all of the ones in between, and what is the type of evidence that is needed. So I think I find that that has been a really helpful tool for people to try to organize their thoughts and try to realize also where is what I'm taking or what some friend recommended, where is that located in the scheme of things.
Yeah, I think it's like, probably don't get, your medical advice from Instagram, unless it's your Instagram, then it's okay.
Exactly, exactly. Mine, and there are quite a few other good people, but there's also some people
Yeah.
who are of
Yeah, but those aren't the ones that are being, getting a million clicks because there's some kind of extreme statement.
exactly.
That's what it's down to, but that's the algorithm, man. That's unfortunately the world that we live in. What are your opinions on fasting? I think this is an important question right now because there has been a lot of back and forth over the last year, especially, I think, when it comes to this.
That's a good one. I argue that and this is one in which this is an unsettled question. Uh, there is clear evidence that during fasting or sleep, which, by the way, go together. When you are sleeping, you are fasting. There's a whole series of mechanism of repair that they can take place. Okay, so as we live, we are subjected to all of these external damages, and so during fasting and during sleep, I put them in the same category. Your body will have the time because you know, it's not active in terms of moving around the world or digesting food to actually focus on the inside and repairing. Now the question is, how long should you be fasting? Most of us in the Western world will be fasting about 8 hours, which is the time that we sleep. We go to bed at 11, wake up at 7, and then have breakfast. And the rest of the time, um, we are eating. Now, one of the things that this is clearly not how we have evolved. Okay, when we have an incredible food abundance, which gives us this luxury of having continuous food. 50,000 years ago, as we lived on the savannah, or 100,000 years ago, as our ancestors lived on the savannah, um, they were eating in a very different way. They were probably grazing from time to time. They would kill an animal and would eat it, and then it would fast. So the idea is that this constant abundance of food is one of the big problems that leads to obesity and to many of the ailments that we are suffering from right now. So there's a whole group of studies that have shown that fasting really will actually make you healthy. And I tell people, so there are many ways to think about fasting. The extreme way is just to stop eating anything for 1 day to 7 days. And so there have been studies showing that there are some clear benefits for these types of things in terms of weight loss, in terms of also really becoming more healthy. But there's also another way, which is something called time restricted feeding, which is the idea of expanding that time of fasting that you do every day. So instead of 8-hour fasting, to increase it to 10, 12, or even 16 hours a day. And so there's a whole group of people who actually are limiting their eating period to about 8 hours a day. Okay, so that would mean you go to sleep at 11 and you fast until the next day at noon. And so during that fasting period, you activate all of these repair and protective mechanisms. The data is still not fully out as to what is really the best way to do this. I would argue that for most of us, you should try to fast 12 hours a day. For me, this is sort of the in between that would really allow.
A lot to ask. All right,
At 12 hours is actually not that hard. Frankly, if you stop eating at 8 o'clock at night, this is until 8 o'clock the next day.
yeah, but are you an okay person to be around? Like on the 11th
Totally,
hour?
totally. And I
Just
tell people,
you don't have the hanger that this
no,
is there a drug for that? No, I
it will,
experience.
it will go away. And I tell people the reason why we get hangry and irascible or nervous when we fast is that many of us actually do not do it enough. And I think it's like having a muscle that you don't exercise. So if I don't tell people to go from a fasting period of 8 hours to a fasting period of 16 hours. It doesn't work. Increase it by 1 hour every week. You will see that soon you'll be able to fast for 12 hours a day. To me, this seems to be a reasonable compromise. The other thing that I think is emerging also is this idea of eating nonstop is highly toxic, and that you're much better off having 2 or 3 meals a day and nothing in between. And when we look at societies across the world, and obesity rates is directly linked to these grazing. The idea is you eat a nice meal, complete, including desserts and everything. But when you stop eating, you allow a period of resting in between until you have your next meal. What is really toxic is the whole idea of snacking and nonstop eating, along with the type of food that you eat when you're snacking. Of course, the highly processed, ice cream and so on.
And to clarify, this is not necessarily for weight loss. This is for longevity, right?
Both,
Yeah.
both, because quite often, frankly, we live in California. 50% of the population is pre-diabetic. 50%. And I think 35% is obese. So when you look at numbers like this, you say that there's got to be something that we have to change as a society.
Okay, we got time for one more question here. This is a good one. What's the biggest thing in the wellness industry? What's the biggest thing the wellness industry gets wrong that drives you crazy as a scientist? What do you see when you're going through your feed? What is your trigger?
That drives me crazy.
Yeah, that drives you crazy.
The whole IV vitamin craze. That is a total scam. A really sort of gullible $700 infusion of something that cost about $2. So yeah, that drives me crazy because it's so profoundly dishonest. Especially, along with this is the whole idea of giving NAD itself. So, I've worked on NAD for 20 years. Uh, NAD levels decrease during aging. That's important. But you can never solve it by giving NAD. You have to either give precursors, NMN or NR, and I have questioned as to whether these work. But the idea of, so the biggest scam is intravenous infusion of NAD, or even worse, skin patches for NAD, which is, I recently saw this. It's like these people have no shame. There is zero evidence that this actually does anything, and it's expensive. It's hard to make. So this would be my pet peeves, including
From shopping malls here.
well, they have one down the street from where I live, and every time I walk in front of that store, it just irritates the heck out of me. I'm thinking, who goes there?
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want? Is there any final message that you want to leave people with? You guys can learn more about the great work the Buck does at buckinstitute.org. You can learn more about the film at foreveryoung.film. Eric, as he said, is starting his own Substack soon, and he's now on Instagram, and it's only a matter of time before you'll see him doing dances on TikTok. So he's now in the social sphere. Welcome to the new world. Any final message you want to leave people with that are curious, that spent their time to join us?
I want to thank you for making the movie. I think it was it's incredibly important. I want to thank all of the audience for joining us today. I think your interest is what feeds us. Your health, really helping you to translate all of this knowledge into something that are actionable for your own life is really what gets me going. I mean, I still run my lab and I love this, but I've discovered a whole second career in just becoming a voice for this field of research and this field of new medicine, which I think is going to change the way we age. And I really appreciate all the feedback. Join us at the Buck. Come to our event. Reach out to us. We have visits. We can do so much more. And I think spread the word also in terms of the movie and what it has meant to you. And learn, educate yourself. And I think one of the things that is the most amazing, if you embark in sort of a health journey, I always tell people, when you start, and you don't have to be absolutely perfect on anything, but the more you do, the better you're going to feel, and the more fulfilling your life will be at the end. So I think to me, that's really what animates me every day.
Beautiful words. Dr. Verdin, thank you for joining us so much, and look forward to seeing you in the real world at some point again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.